Hello everyone, in this video I'm going to talk about the topic of spark plugs. So I'm going to talk about how they actually work, what they're constructed from, what the different options are for spark plug, and how to insert a spark plug and how to remove a spark plug. I'm going to focus on NGK spark plugs. It's not that I believe that they're any better than any other spark plug. It's just that generally with Honda motorcycles they recommend that you use NGK spark plugs. Again, they probably don't do that because they believe that they're any better. It's probably because they're built, or they're originally built in Japan, and Honda have probably always developed their motorcycles using NGK spark plugs. So when it comes to recommending which spark plug you should use in your motorcycle, they generally tend to recommend NGK. I think they might specify alternatives in some of their user manuals or service manuals, but NGK is generally the first spark plug that I see them recommending. Also, I would have a good understanding of the NGK spark plugs, what they're composed of, how to install them, and also importantly how to actually read the spark plug, because there is, on every spark plug there is a number of letters which gives away a lot of information and allows you to read the spark plug and determine if you're using the right spark plug for your engine. So for that reason I'm just going to focus on NGK. So I'm going to start off by discussing the three roles that a spark plug has. So as everybody knows, the spark plug's first job is to provide the spark in the cylinder of the engine. So this is the cylinder of a 150cc engine that I've taken apart, which you've probably seen in other videos that I've done. Okay, so this is the cylinder. This is where the air fuel mixture gets sucked into. Usually the piston is down this end here and it's moving up and down, compressing the gas, and the spark plug is sitting up here at the top, providing the spark to begin to burn in the engine, which powers your motorcycle. So that's the first role of the spark plug. Everybody probably knows about that. The second role, and it's actually quite important and often overlooked with a spark plug, and also it's the reason why the letters on the spark plug are quite important. A spark plug has the role of conducting heat out of the cylinder of the engine and into the metal casing of the engine. Okay, so not here, it actually sits in this part here. I'll just move this cylinder just out of the way in a second, but generally the spark plug sits in this little hole here in the cylinder head. So let me just show you, just to have a better picture. This is our cylinder, this is the top of the cylinder, and this is the cylinder head which sits on top of the cylinder, and then the spark plug sits in here. Okay, so the spark plug sits in here, and it begins to burn in the cylinder of the engine. So let's move that cylinder out of the way. So because the spark plug is screwed into the cylinder head and it's made from metal, it conducts heat from the burning air and fuel mixture in the cylinder of the engine, which is creating heat. It conducts that heat away through the spark plug and into the cylinder head, where it can be dissipated into the atmosphere. So that's the second role of the spark plug, to absorb heat out of the cylinder engine, or to help absorb heat out of the engine. And then the third role is to ensure that there is good compression in the cylinder of the engine. If your spark plug is not inserted correctly, properly, tightly, then it's not going to form a good seal, and that could affect, not always, but it could affect the compression in the cylinder of the engine. And compression is an important component for a properly functioning motorcycle engine. So that's the three roles of the spark plug in the engine. I'll go through those three roles in a little bit more detail in a while, but I just want to talk about firstly how a spark plug is built. So in fairness, it's really quite simple, okay, and they do look quite simple, but to understand how it actually works, you need to understand how it's built. There's really three components, okay. There's the center electrode, which starts here at the very tip. I'll use my little flathead screwdriver as a pointer. So this is the center electrode. This is the top of the spark plug, okay. So the center electrode is what the spark plug cap fits onto. It has some little tiny, what feel like little tiny threads on it, okay, but they're just there to provide grip, I suppose, to make sure that the cap doesn't come off. And the center electrode actually runs the whole way through the spark plug, and it actually comes out at the tip here, okay. So it's one long piece of metal that runs through the middle of the spark plug. That's the center electrode. Now surrounding the center electrode is, as you can see in the top, it's this white bit which is a ceramic insulator, okay. So ceramic is a special material. It has particular properties. It's able to withstand high temperatures, and this particular ceramic is an insulator. So an insulator means that it doesn't conduct electricity, okay, which also means that it doesn't conduct current or charge. So that's the ceramic insulator. Now you can see it at the very top, the white ceramic, but it actually runs the whole way through the center of the spark plug, and it comes out here at the top as well. So this is a used spark plug, so it actually looks a little bit like a brownie color here at the top because it's being used and it's being discolored, but generally that will be a white color. Now that's a used spark plug. Here's a brand new spark plug. So the ceramic is a red color on this one on the top, but at the bottom here, hopefully you can see it here, it's actually a white color. I'll just rotate that so you can see it at some stage. There's actually, just looking in there, you can see that little white ceramic in there. So that's it in there, okay. So that ceramic surrounds the center electrode, and its role is to insulate the center electrode from the rest of the spark plug, which is the third component, which I'll talk about, and that's the ground electrode. So this whole component here, I suppose, is called the shell of the spark plug, okay. So this is where the socket fits onto. It has the threads, it has that little washer, and it has this little ground electrode tip here, which extends out from the thread, okay. So this shell or ground electrode, all this bit here is all connected. It's all a big one piece of metal. The ceramic and the center electrode actually are encased, I suppose, all inside the ground electrode or the shell of the spark plug. Okay, so they're the three components. So the spark plug creates the spark by creating a potential difference, alternatively known as a voltage, between the center electrode and the ground electrode. Okay, so we can see here the spark is created between this gap, which is just here. So I can stick my little flathead screwdriver between this little air gap. So it's just an air gap, it's just, there's nothing there, only air. Okay, that's that little gap. So the spark is created between those two electrodes. And what happens is, let me get my spark plug cap. So the spark plug, I'll put it into the cylinder head first of all. So the spark plug screws, let me just screw it in here. So it's screwed into the head of the motorcycle, and the spark plug cap is connected onto it like so, and this HT lead leads to the ignition coil. Okay, and this is actually connected to another component which is called, through the wiring loom in the motorcycle, it's connected to the CDI box in this case. It might be called the engine control module on more modern motorcycles, and there may be other alternatives to the CDI ignition on other types of older motorcycle maybe. Now what happens is the CDI box or the engine control module are connected to the battery and the alternator of the motorcycle, which supply the power. So they're supplying the electricity, I suppose, or the current or charge to power the ignition coils. Okay, so that's how the power is supplied to the spark plug. Just wanted to touch on that briefly. And the way the voltage is created is the frame of the motorcycle and the engine, they're all connected to the negative terminal of the battery. Okay, so anything that touches this cylinder head or the engine or any part of the frame is actually connected directly to the negative terminal of the battery. Now this part, the shell of the spark plug, is actually screwed into this cylinder head, and as a result it too, because it's made of conductive metal, is essentially connected to the negative terminal of the battery. So this little electrode that's a little hook shape is actually connected directly to the negative terminal of the battery. So we know that the voltage between the positive terminal and the negative terminal of the battery is somewhere between 12, 13 or maybe 14 volts. Okay? Now, a voltage difference of 12, 14 volts between the center electrode and the ground electrode of a spark plug will not create a spark. The reason it will not create a spark is because the air between the two electrodes actually acts as an insulator. So electricity generally cannot flow through air at low voltages of about 12, 13 volts, okay, or 14 volts. There will be no current cannot flow between the two electrodes, so there will be no spark. And that's the role of the ignition coils Okay, so the coils actually act as a voltage amplifier. So they actually amplify the voltage, and I've gone through that in another video how that actually works. But it creates a voltage greater than 10,000 volts. So it's generally, I've seen numbers for the voltage created by ignition coils of between 10,000 and 50,000 volts. So that's the sort of voltage that you need to get electricity or current to move from the flow across that air gap that's between the two electrodes. So it's only a tiny little gap, okay, but it acts as enough of an insulator that current will not flow unless the voltage is high enough. So what the role of the CDI box or the engine control module is to control that voltage or to control that current. So it only sends pulses. Essentially it sends pulses. So that's why we don't have a constant spark across these two electrodes. It's controlled by the electronics of the motorcycle to make sure that there's only a pulse. So that voltage only exists momentarily. And once it exists, once that voltage is between whatever is required, whether it's let's say for argument's sake it's 20,000 volts. So once the voltage reaches between these two electrodes reaches 20,000 volts, the air becomes ionized. Okay, so it basically, that voltage changes the structure or the properties of the air between the two electrodes, and all of a sudden, momentarily at least, for a split second, the air actually acts as a conductor, and it allows current or charge or electrons. It's basically, it's just made up of electrons, free electrons. They flow across this gap, okay, between the two electrodes. So the electrons, as far as I'm aware, they move from the ground electrode to the center electrode. Now the current is indicated as moving from the center electrode to the ground electrode, and essentially as the electrons flow through the air, they create that spark, and that spark, they also create a huge amount of heat, and it's that heat and that burning, I suppose, it creates a little spark, which is essentially a very hot air. That's the way you would probably describe it, and it raises the temperature to something in the order of 6,000 Kelvin. And that temperature is enough to ignite the air-fuel mixture in the cylinder of the engine, and it begins a chain reaction in the cylinder of the engine. So that little spark begins it turns into a burn. If there is the right combination of air and fuel, it will just begin a burn, which moves through the cylinder of the engine, wherever that air and fuel mixture are. Okay, it's not actually an explosion, it's called a burn. Okay, that's an important point. So that's essentially how the spark plug works, how it creates that spark. So let's talk a little bit more in detail about the second role of the spark plug, which is to conduct electricity, or to conduct heat, sorry, out of the cylinder of the engine and into the casing of the cylinder head, and then into the atmosphere where it can be dissipated. The fact that the burn in the cylinder of the engine reaches a couple of 100 degrees Kelvin, okay? But the burn at the spark plug between the two electrodes is the order of a couple of 1,000 Kelvin, so it's much hotter. It's very, very hot, and that At this point here where the burn begins, along with the heat from the spark, that heat, a lot of it will be dissipated, will be conducted by that center electrode, and also some of it will be conducted by the earth electrode, and it will be absorbed back up through the spark plug, through the threads, through the through the ground electrode, through the shell of the spark plug, but also through the central electrode. Okay, so that heat will be absorbed up through it. Now again, because that's screwed into the head of the engine, or the cylinder head, it will then, the heat will then be dissipated into the cylinder head, and then this is in contact with the air, the fins are in contact with the air, and it's conducted into the atmosphere. So that's the second role of the spark plug, and it's actually quite an important role. Okay, now if we look at the letters on the spark plug, this particular spark plug, it reads DPR 7EA9. Now the 7 in this spark plug, so it's the fourth digit on the spark plug reading, this actually indicates the how hot the spark plug is. So by how hot a spark plug is, that 7 can range anywhere. You can get a spark plug that has instead of a 7, you can have anywhere generally between a 4 and a 10. Okay, now a 10 indicates a cold spark plug, and the range can go from 1 to 10, but generally, as far as I'm aware, you will generally a 4 is generally the lowest number that's realistically used with spark plugs in motorcycle engines. But if you replace that 7 with a 10, it will be a colder spark plug. If you replaced it with a 4 spark plug, it was a DPR 4EA9, that would indicate that it's a hotter spark plug. So that number there indicates how good that spark plug is at conducting heat out from the cylinder of the engine up through the spark plug and into the cylinder head and into the atmosphere. Okay, now if this number was a 10, okay, that means that it's very good, the spark plug is very good at conducting heat through it and into the cylinder head. So the heat is created here, it conducts that heat very efficiently and dumps it into the cylinder head. If this digit, the 7, was replaced with a 4, that indicates that it's a hot spark plug, and a hot spark plug means that it does not conduct that heat very efficiently. So that heat remains in the tip of the spark plug. So if it creates a very high temperature, instead of conducting it away very quickly, that heat remains in the tip of the spark plug. So that spark plug, the top of the spark plug, which sticks out into the cylinder, that gets very hot, okay, with a hot spark plug. So that's what a hot spark plug means. Now, why would you need a hot or a cold spark plug? Well, a hot spark plug would be used in different scenarios to a cold spark plug. Okay, now I won't get into too much detail on that, but now this particular engine, I'm not sure what the recommendation is for the spark plug on this particular engine, but this spark plug came out of my Honda Shadow. Now the recommendation, what Honda recommend for this spark plug in my Honda Shadow is a DPR 8EA9. Now what was taken out was a 7EA9. Now I put back in DPR 8EA9. Okay, I put in whatever was recommended. And that is quite important, that if you're the motorcycle manufacturer recommends that you go with a DPR 8EA9. I think also for my Honda VFR, the same spark plug is recommended. Then you have to make sure that you are using the recommended spark plug, because otherwise the spark plug will be either too hot or too cold, and that will affect how the engine works. Honda recommend that spark plug because it is the optimal spark plug for that engine. When a motorcycle is running at idle, for example, when you're not really revving the engine, the energy created in the cylinder of the engine will not be as much as will be created when you're revving the engine. So when the engine is just sitting at idle, it's just ticking over, it will not be creating that much energy, okay? And that means that the tip of the spark plug will not be as hot, okay? But when you're revving the engine very high, when you're maybe racing the motorcycle, there will be a huge amount of energy created in the cylinder of the engine, and that has to be dissipated away quite quickly. And again, if you have a hot spark plug in the cylinder of your engine, or a plug that is too hot for that particular engine, it will not get that energy away quick enough, that heat energy, and the tip of your spark plug will heat up, okay? Beyond, it will get hotter than it is recommended. And if it gets hotter than is recommended, then you run the risk of detonation. So what detonation is when the spark plug gets too hot at the tip, and it actually causes the air and fuel mixture to ignite prematurely, okay? And detonation is bad for an engine. I'm not going to get into the reasons why, but that's why the hotness, or how hot or how cold a spark plug is quite important, and why you should stick to the manufacturer recommendations. Did this DPR 7EA9 spark plug damage the engine on my Honda Shadow? So far I haven't noticed that it caused any damage. Would it realistically? Probably not. If I went for a DPR 8, or sorry, if I went for a DPR 9 EA9, it's a little bit colder than the recommended spark plug. It might not be the end of the world. The spark plug that was a little bit hotter, I haven't noticed any difference in the running of the motorcycle engine. It probably doesn't make a huge amount of difference, but where it might make more of a difference is if you're racing that engine. If you're really if you're having the engine run on high revs for a continued amount of time or under heavy load, then the hotness of the spark plug becomes more of a factor. Also, if you're constantly running your motorcycle at idle for long periods of time, or if you're in stop-start traffic and you're not revving that engine, again, that's another extreme for the engine running. And again, the hotness of the spark plug may become more of a factor. So there's no need to think that you're going to outsmart the motorcycle manufacturer. If they recommend a particular spark plug, then you should probably stick to that. So by standard spark plug, I mean that the spark plug is made from a nickel alloy. So these are probably the cheapest spark plugs that NGK manufacture. Okay, they are perfectly fine for I think about 30,000 miles. I think I've looked that up on the NGK website, and after 30,000 miles, what happens is that because of the constant spark between the two electrodes, and because of the heat created, it actually wears the surface of the electrodes over time. And you probably, I don't know if you can see it that closely, but it's actually quite, it's a round tip here, but it's actually very sharp edges. And the same on the ground electrode, it's all very sharp edges, okay? It's all clearly defined. And what happens is, as they get worn away, the electrodes become rounded off, okay? And that affects how the spark plug works. It doesn't work as efficiently, and it begins to wear. Over time, that gap will actually increase. So what can happen is the center electrode can actually wear down, 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 and eventually the center electrode, it looks like it's almost down to the ceramic insulator, and possibly starts to go into the ceramic insulator. Now at that stage, the gap will be too great, okay? So at a certain point, the gap will be so great between the two electrodes that even a voltage of 20,000 volts will not create a spark. And eventually it will begin to fail. You will not get a spark moving across the gap between the two electrodes, and you get spark plug failure. So to avoid that, they recommend that you replace the spark plugs approximately for these nickel alloy spark plugs. This particular one, well, I think I've looked it up for the DPR8EA9 nickel alloy spark plug, and it's about 30,000 miles, okay? Will you get any longer? You probably will. If you run it longer than that, it'll probably work fine. But their recommendation, again, is to replace them at 30,000 miles. And I don't see any reason why you would want to second guess NGK and their recommendation. Now, they don't just make nickel alloy spark plugs. They can actually make the spark plugs with the electrodes made from a harder metal like platinum. Okay, so platinum will be a harder metal, and as a result it will work exactly the same. It will look very similar, and those spark plugs, as I said, you can get a platinum one, and you can also get an iridium spark plug. Okay, now the platinum is harder than the nickel alloy, and that means that it will last longer. I'm not sure how long the platinum spark plugs last, but I've looked up the iridium spark plugs from NGK, and their recommendation on the, let's say, DPR7, or sorry, the DPR8EA9, I forget, the digits are slightly different, but it indicates that it's an iridium spark plug. Essentially, it will last for, or the recommendation is that you replace it every 50,000 miles. Okay, so the harder metal, it doesn't change the performance of the spark plug. It should perform exactly the same. It's just that the metal lasts longer between the electrodes, and therefore the spark plug doesn't have to be changed as frequently. Now I think I saw that the price for a nickel alloy spark plug was about $2 or $3, but for the iridium spark plug it was between $8 and $9. So it gives you less than twice the length of lifetime. So it goes from 30,000 miles to 50,000 miles, but the price is over 3 times. It's over 3 times the price. Something like 3 times the price. So if you replace your own spark plugs, it might not be economically advantageous to be using platinum or iridium spark plugs because they're so much more expensive. But you might have your reason for why you want to use platinum spark plugs. What would they be? Well, if you're going to own this motorcycle, you're pretty sure you own it for 100,000 or 200,000 miles, which I don't know, do many people own a motorcycle for that length or for that mileage? But if you did, then it might be more advantageous for you to use iridium spark plugs, because over 100,000 miles you might only have to replace your spark plug once during the period that you own that motorcycle. Okay, you'll get it 100,000 miles if you put in iridium spark plugs at the beginning, and at 50,000 miles replace them, and then you have, that's only really one replacement of the spark plugs during the life of the owning that motorcycle, possibly two. So where it might be more advantageous from a cost perspective is if you're paying a mechanic to replace the spark plugs. I don't know how much they will charge you for replacing the spark plugs, but they might charge you $50, $100, I'm not 100% sure. But in that case, iridium spark plugs might be more advantageous, because you're not just paying for the spark plugs, you're paying for the replacement of the spark plugs. And if it's on a motorcycle where the spark plugs are really hard to gain access to, it's a complete pain in the ass, then maybe you want to go with iridium so that you don't have to be taking off all your fairings, tank, airbox to get at spark plugs. So that's where iridium spark plugs can become advantageous. On my Honda Shadow, to get at spark plugs, change them. It's so simple. I don't know if I'm ever going to do another 30,000 miles. The bike is a 1985 Honda Shadow. It only has 40,000 miles on it. For all I know, these spark plugs here that came off it, they could well be the original spark plugs. These NGK, who knows? They could have lasted for 40,000 miles. So that's the different metals that are used to make the spark plugs and the advantages of them. But for the most purposes, the nickel alloy spark plugs work perfectly fine. You will see reference to copper spark plugs quite a bit. You will not actually find NGK, as far as I'm aware, they don't make copper spark plugs. But they do mention in their material on their website that nearly all of their spark plugs contain copper in them. So where is the copper? The copper is actually, the copper would not actually be used for the electrodes here, because copper is a soft metal and it would get damaged quite quickly. I don't know how long copper spark plugs would, copper spark plugs with copper electrodes would last, but probably not that long. Certainly not as long as nickel alloy spark plugs before you'd have to replace them. But what they do use is the copper is actually used between the top and the bottom of the center electrode. There is actually copper in the middle of the ceramic, okay? And that copper is there because copper is a very good conductor of heat. And again, because it's important that a spark plug is able to conduct that heat away from the electrodes very quickly and efficiently, copper is used in the middle of the electrode as just as a conductor, because it's not actually the heat in the middle of it will not be dealing with that couple of thousands degrees Kelvin. Okay, it's going to be dealing with a lot less temperature. Once it's going to dissipate quickly, that temperature, as you move up through the center of the spark plug. So that's why copper is used. It's just there to conduct the heat. It's not there to act as a good conductor of electricity. That's not what its role is. NGK are quite adamant about that. They stated it very clearly. And yeah, it's just the copper is in the middle of nearly all their electrodes. It doesn't matter if it's iridium, platinum, or nickel. There will be copper in it generally in the middle, and it's there to conduct heat. So that's the metals that are used in NGK spark plugs for the most part. That might not be thorough, but that covers probably 90% of the spark plugs that they sell.